Sarah Martinez's cleaning rag froze mid-wipe when she saw the number 847 circled in red marker on the conference room whiteboard. Every executive had walked past it for 3 days, but she knew that number was wrong. The Hartwell Industries merger worth $3 billion had just collapsed that morning because of a calculation error, and she was staring right at it. Before we continue, if you enjoy incredible true stories of ordinary people changing everything, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. Sarah had been cleaning the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower for 18 months, invisible to the executives who rushed past her with their expensive suits and urgent phone calls. At 34, she was raising her 8-year-old daughter Emma alone after her husband David died in a construction accident 2 years earlier. The night shift janitor job paid just enough to cover their small apartment in Queens and Emma's school supplies, but barely left room for anything else. The conference room she was cleaning had been buzzing with activity for weeks. Hartwell Industries, a century-old manufacturing company, was in merger talks with TechFlow Dynamics, a rising tech startup. The deal would transform both companies and create thousands of jobs. Sarah had overheard fragments of conversations as she emptied trash bins and wiped down tables. Revenue projections, market share analysis, technological integration costs. Numbers that meant everything to these people in suits, and nothing to someone just trying to keep the lights on. But Sarah had a secret that none of these executives knew. Before Emma was born, before she met David, before life took her down a different path, she had been 3 credits away from finishing her accounting degree at Queens College. She understood those numbers on the whiteboards better than anyone realized. Financial statements, cash flow projections, depreciation schedules. The language of business was still fluent in her mind, even if her hands now held mops instead of calculators. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Sarah dropped Emma at school, buying her daughter's favorite chocolate chip muffin from the bodega with the last $5 in her wallet. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had mentioned that the class was planning a field trip to the Science Museum, but the $40 fee might as well have been $4,000 for Sarah's budget. She promised Emma they would find a way, then spent the subway ride to work running through impossible calculations in her head. The Meridian Tower was already humming with pre-dawn activity when Sarah arrived at 5 a.m. The merger announcement was supposed to happen that afternoon at 2 p.m., pending final approval from both boards of directors. She could feel the tension in the air as she moved through the floors. Executives were arriving earlier than usual, their voices sharp with stress and caffeine. As Sarah cleaned the 38th floor, she overheard fragments of a heated conversation from the TechFlow Dynamics corner office. Victoria Chun, the company's brilliant young CEO, was on a conference call with her board. Her voice carried a frustration that Sarah recognized from her own life. The kind of frustration that comes when everything you've worked for hangs by a thread. The numbers don't add up, Victoria was saying. Hartwell's third-quarter projections show a gap we didn't account for. Their manufacturing costs are higher than reported. If we proceed with the original terms, we're looking at a 30% loss in year 2. Sarah paused her cleaning, the accounting part of her brain automatically engaged. Manufacturing cost overruns were common in older companies like Hartwell. Legacy systems, outdated equipment, union contracts that hadn't been updated. But those costs were usually buried in operational expenses, not always visible in quarterly reports. The call ended abruptly, and Sarah heard Victoria's chair scrape against the floor. Through the partially open door, she saw the CEO standing at her window, looking out at the city below with the weight of decision on her shoulders. Victoria was only 29, a Stanford MBA who had built TechFlow from a college dorm room idea into a company worth hundreds of millions. But right now, she looked as lost as Sarah felt some nights when the bills piled up faster than her paycheck. By 8 a.m., word was spreading through the building like wildfire. The merger was in jeopardy. Hartwell's board was demanding a renegotiation of terms. TechFlow's investors were getting nervous. The carefully orchestrated announcement scheduled for that afternoon was suddenly in question. Sarah continued her work, moving through the floors as conversations swirled around her. In the elevator, Two junior analysts discussed how a failed merger could tank both companies' stock prices. In the break room, an administrative assistant worried about layoffs if the deal fell through. The human cost of these financial decisions wasn't lost on Sarah. Behind every number on those whiteboards were real people with real lives, just like her and Emma. When she reached the 42nd floor at 10 a.m., the energy was different. This was where the senior executives worked, where the final decisions were made. The conference room she needed to clean was adjacent to the office of Richard Hartwell III, the 62-year-old CEO whose great-grandfather had founded the company in 1924. Old money, old traditions, and old ways of doing business that were increasingly out of step with the modern economy. The conference room still bore the remnants of the previous night's emergency session. Coffee cups with rings of dried residue, crumpled papers in the wastebaskets, and 3 whiteboards covered with financial projections and strategic scenarios. Sarah began her systematic cleaning, starting with the trash and working her way toward the boards. As she wiped down the first whiteboard, her eyes automatically scanned the numbers. Cash flow projections for the next 5 years, market penetration estimates, cost savings from operational synergies. The math was sound, the projections realistic. Nothing here explained the crisis that was unfolding. The second whiteboard contained more detailed operational data: manufacturing output, labor costs, facility maintenance, research and development investments. Again, Sarah's trained eye found nothing obviously wrong. The numbers told the story of a company that was stable but struggling to innovate, exactly what made it attractive to a tech-forward partner like TechFlow. It was the third whiteboard that made her stop. This one contained what appeared to be a reconciliation of Hartwell's reported manufacturing costs versus their actual operational expenses. The kind of deep-dive analysis that would only be done during due diligence for a major transaction. And there, in the middle of the board, was a number that made Sarah's blood run cold. The quarterly manufacturing cost was listed as $847 million, circled in red marker with a note beside it: discrepancy. Investigate further. But Sarah could see immediately that something was wrong. The number should have been 487 million, not 847. Someone had transposed the digits, turning a manageable cost variance into a deal-killing crisis. She looked more closely at the surrounding calculations. The rest of the analysis was based on the incorrect 847 million figure. No wonder TechFlow was getting cold feet. If Hartwell's manufacturing costs were really that high, the merger would indeed be a disaster. But they weren't. This was a simple data entry error that had cascaded through every subsequent calculation. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the cleaning cloth. She was staring at a mistake that could destroy both companies, eliminate thousands of jobs, and derail what should have been a successful partnership. The executives who had spent weeks analyzing these numbers had all missed the transposed digits. They were so focused on the complex strategic implications that they had overlooked a basic arithmetic error. For a moment, Sarah considered simply correcting the number with her own pen, but she realized immediately how that would look. A janitor altering financial documents would be fired instantly, possibly even arrested for tampering with corporate records. Her word against that of Harvard MBAs and experienced CFOs would be no contest. But she couldn't just walk away. Not when she knew that thousands of people's livelihoods hung in the balance. Not when two companies were about to make a catastrophic decision based on false information. And not when her own daughter's future depended on the economic stability that successful businesses like these provided to their communities. Sarah pulled out her phone and took a picture of the whiteboard, making sure the error was clearly visible. Then she thought about who she could possibly approach with this information. Richard Hartwell was completely out of reach, surrounded by layers of assistants and executives. Victoria Chun was more accessible, but still unlikely to listen to a janitor's concerns about financial analysis. Then she remembered Marcus Rodriguez, the VP of Operations at TechFlow. She had cleaned his office many times over the past months, and he had always been polite, even friendly. More importantly, she had overheard him on calls discussing manufacturing processes and cost structures. He would understand the significance of what she had discovered. Sarah finished cleaning the conference room, her mind racing with how to approach Marcus. She couldn't simply knock on his office door. She needed to find a way to communicate the information without seeming to overstep her role or breach confidentiality. As she moved her cleaning cart toward Marcus's office, she could hear raised voices from the executive conference room down the hall. The emergency board meeting had begun, and the tone was not encouraging. Someone was talking about unacceptable risk exposure and fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. The merger was dying in real time, killed by a simple mistake that no one had caught. Marcus's office was empty when Sarah arrived, but his computer was still on, displaying what appeared to be a financial model. She could see Hartwell's manufacturing costs prominently featured in the analysis, the incorrect 847 million figure highlighted in red as a major concern. Every calculation in the model was wrong because of that single transposed number. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't directly alter the documents, but she could leave the information where Marcus would find it. She took a post-it note from his desk and wrote, "Check manufacturing cost calculation, possible digit transposition error. Should be 487, not 847. She stuck the note directly on his computer monitor where he couldn't miss it. Then she did something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She wrote her name and phone number at the bottom of the note. If this backfired, if she was wrong about the calculation or if her intervention was seen as inappropriate, she would face the consequences. But if she was right, if this simple correction could save the merger and the jobs that depended on it, then the risk was worth taking. Sarah continued her cleaning routine, but her heart was pounding as she worked. Every few minutes, she glanced toward Marcus's office, waiting for him to return. The voices from the board meeting continued to echo down the hallway, growing more heated as the morning progressed. At 11:30 a.m., Marcus finally returned to his office. Sarah was cleaning a nearby conference room when she heard his chair scrape against the floor as he sat down. There was a long pause, then the sound of papers rustling, then silence. Minutes stretched like hours. Sarah found herself cleaning the same section of table repeatedly, straining to hear any indication of Marcus's reaction to her note. Had he even seen it? Had he dismissed it as the presumptuous interference of a janitor? Or was he checking the calculations right now? The silence was broken by the rapid clicking of computer keys. Then more silence. Then the sound of a phone being dialed. "Victoria, it's Marcus. I need you to pull up the Hartwell manufacturing cost analysis." "Yes, the third quarter numbers. Look at the base figure we used for quarterly costs." A pause. "No, look at it again. What if that 847 should be 487? "Yes, I know how that sounds, but just run the model with the corrected figure." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. He was checking. He was taking her note seriously. "Jesus Christ, Victoria. You're right. The entire analysis changes. With the correct manufacturing costs, the merger terms actually favor us. We're not looking at a loss, we're looking at a 20% gain by year 3. Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know how we missed it. Every single calculation was based on that wrong number. Look, can you call an emergency session with the board? We need to halt the current meeting and present the corrected analysis. This changes everything." The sound of more rapid dialing filled the hallway. "Richard, it's Marcus Rodriguez from TechFlow. I know your board is meeting right now, but we've discovered a significant error in the cost analysis. The merger is still viable. More than viable, it's exactly what both our companies need." Sarah had to lean against the wall to steady herself. Her simple observation, her willingness to risk her job to point out a basic arithmetic error, had just resurrected a dead deal. The merger was back on. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Sarah watched from her cleaning station as executives hurried between offices, as phones rang constantly, as the energy in the building shifted from despair to cautious optimism. The afternoon announcement was back on schedule, but now it would be celebrating success instead of explaining failure. At 12:45 p.m., as Sarah was finishing her cleaning rounds, Marcus Rodriguez appeared beside her cart. She looked up, expecting to see anger or confusion in his face. Instead, she saw something she hadn't expected: respect. Sarah Martinez? He asked, reading from her note. She nodded, unable to find her voice. I don't know how you caught what 4 teams of analysts missed, but you just saved 2 companies and about 15,000 jobs. That was a hell of a catch. Sarah finally found her words. I used to study accounting. Before life got complicated. I saw the number and something just didn't look right. Marcus smiled. Well, your accounting instincts are better than our entire financial teams. Victoria Chin wants to meet you. Both companies owe you a debt of gratitude. I just did what anyone would do, Sarah said quietly.
No, Marcus replied firmly.
Most people would have walked by that board 100 times without seeing what you saw. And even if they had seen it, most people wouldn't have taken the risk to point it out. You chose to speak up when it mattered. That afternoon, Sarah found herself in the same conference room she had been cleaning that morning, sitting across from Victoria Chen and Richard Hartwell III. The whiteboard behind them now showed the corrected calculations, the deal terms that made sense, the partnership that would benefit both companies. Victoria leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. Sarah, I understand you have a background in accounting? Some college, Sarah replied. I never finished my degree. Would you be interested in finishing it? Richard Hartwell asked. Both companies have educational assistance programs. Full tuition, flexible scheduling to work around your family obligations. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. I have a daughter. I can't afford to stop working. You wouldn't have to, Victoria said. We're also offering you a position in our financial analysis department. Entry level, but with a clear path for advancement as you complete your education. The starting salary is $65,000 a year. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. $65,000 was more than 3 times what she was making as a janitor. It was enough to move Emma to a better school district, to pay for that field trip to the Science Museum, to start building the kind of life she had dreamed of for her daughter. Why? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Richard Hartwell, a man who had inherited a billion-dollar company and never known a day of financial uncertainty in his life, looked at her with something approaching awe. Because you saw what we couldn't see. Because you cared enough to risk your job to tell us the truth. Because that's exactly the kind of person we need making decisions about our future. The merger announcement that afternoon was covered by every major financial news outlet. Hartwell Industries and TechFlow Dynamics, joining forces to create a manufacturing and technology powerhouse. 15,000 jobs preserved and enhanced. Billions in shareholder value created. A textbook example of successful corporate partnership. But none of the news reports mentioned the single mother janitor who had saved the deal by spotting a transposed number on a whiteboard. None of them told the story of Sarah Martinez, who had been invisible to the business world until the moment her knowledge and courage made her the most important person in the building. 6 months later, Sarah was enrolled in evening classes at Queen's College, working toward her accounting degree while managing financial analysis projects at TechFlow during the day. Emma was thriving in her new school, making friends and bringing home stories about science experiments and art projects. The field trip to the Science Museum had been just the beginning of new opportunities. But Sarah never forgot the lesson of that October morning. Success in business, in life, in anything that mattered, wasn't just about having the right education or the right connections or the right background. It was about seeing clearly, caring deeply, and having the courage to speak up when your voice could make a difference. The whiteboard in her small home office now contained Emma's math homework and Sarah's study notes side by side. Numbers that represented not just calculations, but possibilities. Dreams that were no longer impossible, but simply waiting to be calculated into reality. And sometimes, late at night when Emma was asleep and Sarah was studying for her next exam, she would think about that moment when her cleaning rag had frozen mid-wipe. How a single observation, a willingness to risk everything for the truth, had changed not just her life, but the lives of thousands of people she would never meet. In the months that followed, Sarah's story became legend within both companies, though most employees never learned her name. They called her the janitor who saved the merger, a modern-day David who had slayed the Goliath of corporate oversight with nothing but sharp eyes and sharper instincts. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't in the headlines or the gratitude of executives. It was in the small moments that her new life made possible. The first time Emma came home from school talking about her advanced math class, Sarah felt a pride that went beyond her own accomplishments. Her daughter was growing up in a world where education was an expectation, not a luxury, where field trips and science camps and college preparation courses were simply part of the natural progression toward a bright future. Sarah's own education progressed rapidly. Her professors at Queen's College quickly recognized that she wasn't a typical returning student. Her real-world experience, combined with her natural analytical abilities, made her stand out in every class. Financial accounting, corporate finance, auditing principles. The subjects that had once been theoretical were now deeply practical, informed by her daily work at TechFlow. Her supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, was a brilliant woman in her 40s who had climbed the corporate ladder through a combination of technical expertise and political savvy. Jennifer became Sarah's mentor, guiding her through the complexities of corporate financial analysis while respecting the unique perspective she brought to every project. "You see patterns that others miss," Jennifer told her during one of their weekly meetings. "Most analysts get so focused on the complex modeling that they lose sight of the basic logic. You start with the fundamentals and build up. It's a rare skill." Sarah's first major project was a post-merger integration analysis, examining how the combined companies were performing against their original projections. It was fitting work, considering how she had entered this world. As she dove into the data, she discovered that her initial observation about the manufacturing costs had been just the tip of the iceberg. Hartwell Industries had been systematically underreporting various operational expenses for years, not out of malice, but out of outdated accounting practices that didn't capture the true cost of modern manufacturing. The merger had forced a modernization of their financial systems, revealing inefficiencies that had been hidden for decades. But the revelation also showed opportunities. With proper cost management and the technological improvements that TechFlow brought to the partnership, the combined company was actually performing better than even the corrected projections had suggested. Sarah's analysis showed potential cost savings of nearly $50 million annually through strategic operational changes. Victoria Chun, now CEO of the merged company called Hartwell TechFlow Industries, read Sarah's report with growing amazement. The same woman who had spotted a simple arithmetic error was now identifying complex strategic opportunities that could transform the entire business. "Sarah," Victoria said during their quarterly review meeting, "I want you to consider something. We're opening a new division focused on operational excellence and cost optimization. It would involve traveling to our facilities across the country, conducting the same kind of analysis you just completed for the main operation. Are you interested in leading that team?" The offer was staggering. It would mean a promotion to director level, with a salary that would put Emma through any college she wanted to attend. But it would also mean more time away from home, more responsibility, more visibility in a corporate world where Sarah was still learning the unwritten rules. "Can I think about it?" Sarah asked. "Of course," Victoria replied. "But Sarah, I want you to know something. When you left that note for Marcus, you didn't just save a business deal. You showed us what real leadership looks like. Leadership isn't about having the right title or the right degree. It's about seeing clearly and acting courageously when it matters most. That's exactly what we need in this new role." That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with Emma, helping with homework that now seemed almost elementary compared to the financial models she was building at work. But these moments with her daughter remained the most important part of her day. "Mom," Emma said, looking up from her math worksheet. "Mrs. Patterson said you work with big companies now." "I do," Sarah replied. "I help them understand their money better." "Like when you help me with my allowance?" Sarah laughed. "Something like that, but with much bigger numbers." Emma was quiet for a moment, then looked at her mother with the serious expression that sometimes made her seem older than her 9 years. "Are you happy, Mom?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "You work a lot more now. You study at night. Sometimes you look really tired. I just want to make sure you're happy." Sarah pulled her daughter close, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with being a single parent. You know what makes me happy? Knowing that you can be anything you want to be when you grow up. Knowing that we don't have to worry about money for your school or your future. And knowing that when you see something wrong in the world, you'll have the confidence to speak up about it, just like I did. Emma nodded solemnly. I want to be like you when I grow up. No, Sarah said firmly but gently. I want you to be better than me. I want you to have all the opportunities one didn't have so you can help even more people. The conversation stayed with Sarah as she considered Victoria's offer. Was she taking this new opportunity for the right reasons? Was she building the life she wanted, or just accepting the life that circumstances had offered her? The answer came to her gradually, as she walked through the same building where she had once worked nights cleaning offices. Now she walked these halls in tailored business suits, carrying reports that could influence million-dollar decisions. But she never forgot the view from the other side, the perspective of someone whose hard work remained invisible to those in power. Sarah accepted the promotion, but with conditions. She would lead the Operational Excellence Division, but she would also establish a program to identify and develop talent from unexpected places within the company. Janitors with business instincts, administrative assistants with strategic thinking, security guards with analytical skills. The invisible workforce that kept companies running often possessed insights that formal education couldn't provide. The program became one of Hartwell Techflow's most successful initiatives. Within 2 years, they had promoted dozens of employees from support roles into professional positions, many of whom discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed. The company's innovation scores increased dramatically, driven by perspectives that traditional hiring practices would never have captured. Sarah's own story continued to evolve. She completed her accounting degree summa cum laude, then immediately began working toward an MBA. But her greatest achievement wasn't academic. It was the culture of observation and courage that she had helped create within the company. The whiteboard where she had first spotted the error was now preserved in the company's main conference room, not erased but immortalized as a reminder that truth could come from anywhere, and that sometimes the most important insights came from those who were closest to the actual work being done. Marcus Rodriguez, who had become a close friend and colleague, often told new employees about the day a janitor saved a billion-dollar merger. But he always emphasized the deeper lesson, that expertise wasn't just about credentials, and that wisdom often came from experience rather than education. Victoria Chin frequently spoke at business schools about the importance of diverse perspectives in corporate decision-making. She would tell Sarah's story as an example of how companies could miss critical insights by only listening to voices that sounded like their own. But for Sarah, the real measure of success wasn't in the accolades or the career advancement. It was in the letter she received from a young woman named Maria Santos, who had been working as a receptionist at one of their manufacturing facilities when Sarah's team visited for an operational assessment. Maria had noticed discrepancies in the facility's inventory reports, but had never felt comfortable raising concerns to management. Inspired by Sarah's story and the company's new culture of inclusive input, she had documented her observations and presented them to the assessment team. Her insights had revealed a systematic problem with the facility's inventory management system, leading to cost savings of over $2 million annually. More importantly, Maria had been promoted to the operations management team and was now pursuing her own business degree through the company's educational assistance program. I never thought someone like me could make a difference in the business side of things, Maria wrote in her letter to Sarah. Your story showed me that seeing clearly and speaking up isn't about what degree you have or what title you hold. It's about caring enough to notice when something isn't right and being brave enough to do something about it. Sarah kept that letter on her desk, next to a photo of Emma at her elementary school science fair, presenting a project about how small observations could lead to big discoveries. The apple, as they say, hadn't fallen far from the tree. Years later, when Sarah was named CFO of Hartwell Techflow Industries, becoming the first person in the company's history to rise from janitor to C-suite executive, the business press would write extensively about her unconventional path to corporate leadership. They would analyze her innovative approaches to financial management, her commitment to operational excellence, and her ability to spot opportunities that others missed. But they would always come back to that October morning when a single mother working the night shift had looked at a whiteboard and seen what Harvard MBAs had missed. The story of Sarah Martinez became more than just a corporate success story. It became a reminder that intelligence and insight could emerge from anywhere, and that sometimes the most important voice in the room belonged to someone who wasn't supposed to be in the room at all. The whiteboard was still there, preserved under glass, the number 847 still circled in red marker. But now it was surrounded by other artifacts of the company's commitment to inclusive leadership. Photos of employees who had been promoted from unexpected roles, testimonials from workers whose insights had driven innovation, awards from business organizations recognizing the company's groundbreaking approach to talent development. Emma, now in college studying business and mathematics, would sometimes visit her mother's office and look at that preserved whiteboard. She understood its significance not just as a symbol of her mother's success, but as a representation of what was possible when people had the courage to trust their instincts and speak their truth. "Mom," Emma said during one such visit, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't written that note to Marcus?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Every day," she replied. "Not just what would have happened to the merger, but what would have happened to all the people whose lives changed because I chose to speak up. You, me, Maria Santos, all the employees who found new opportunities. Sometimes I think about the parallel universe where I just cleaned that board and moved on." "But you didn't," Emma pointed out. "No," Sarah agreed. "I didn't, and that made all the difference." The janitor had become the CFO. The invisible had become indispensable. And the number that had been wrong on a whiteboard had become the foundation for a completely different way of thinking about who belonged in the boardroom, whose insights mattered, and what real leadership actually looked like. In the end, Sarah Martinez had done more than save a merger. She had proven that the most important qualifications for leadership were the ones that couldn't be taught in any classroom. The ability to see clearly, the courage to act decisively, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the most powerful voice in any conversation belonged to the person who was brave enough to whisper the truth.